A long time ago, there was a war between humans and monsters that lasted 100 years, in which there were many losses. One day, both sides got tired of the war and decided to live together in peace. That's right, friends, monsters and humans live together on a daily basis. From then on, we meet our protagonist, Dr. Glenn, who has a clinic to treat monsters. Unlike other animes, male monsters are shown here, and it makes more sense for them to reproduce. On the other hand, we meet Dr. Safe, a half-snake who helps at the clinic. Both characters have been childhood friends since the war between monsters and humans. When it all ended, they separated and cried, but they met again at medical school, graduated, and started working together. And if you're wondering, yes, Safe is in love with our protagonist, and she is very jealous of him. Every time she sees him with another girl, she protects him out of love. And so begins the summary of Monster Girl Doctor. Well, our heroes receive a letter from their medical professor known as Dr. Thulhi, an octopus woman. She invites them to set up her clinic in the city of Linwood, where humans and monsters live in harmony. Her first task is to check on the fighters in the Colosseum. Among them was Tizalia, a centaur who looks at our protagonist and immediately asks him to marry her. First, it seemed that this centaur had no problems, but then they discover that her posture on the battlefield has worsened. Glenn noticed that her hooves were very out of control, so he added some hooves made by these cyclopes, the most important one being this one called Meme. First, the centaur wouldn't stop making strange noises, so Safe tied her up with her tail. In the end, she competes again and promises that one day she will win Glenn's heart and marry him because, you know, in this type of anime, the protagonists are very lucky. A few days later, our beings walk through the city and meet a girl named Lulala who is very poor and for little money sings very beautiful songs. Our protagonist, being a good person, hears her voice and finds some physical problems. As Lula kept staying on the surface, his gills began to fail to such an extent that every time he entered the water his body could not differentiate between lungs through the aquatic respirators. Seconds later, a child falls into the river because of the current, so Lulala saves him, but she faints because of the problem of not being able to breathe underwater. However, our protagonist is like the macho man that he is, nothing in relation to her does mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. In the end, Glenn gives the mermaid a recipe to cure her throat and gills, who begins to sing in the center to earn more money. Also, as expected, Lulala falls in love with our protagonist. How lucky ugly people are. Days later, our beings receive a visit from the city's representative, a dragon named Scotty, who for now covers her face. What happens is that her assistant, a muscular girl named Kunai, lost her arm because she was chasing some slave trading monsters. Kunai at first didn't allow herself to be touched because she hates doctors because she was a mutant creation experiment. The golem sets out alone in search of her arm, but on the way she meets slaves who strategically break her leg, leaving her out of action. On the other hand, Glenn goes out in search of her and in the middle, with the help of Tizalia, finds the leg. Then, with the help of Lulala, he finds the arm. He very cleverly touches both limbs, causing Kunai to emit strange noises. Finally, he finds her and we see that this girl has no connection with her limbs because none of them belong to her, but our protagonist joins the blood cells, leaving them completely connected. In the end, Kunai thanks our protagonist and discovers that his creator was not a doctor, he was a cruel guy. Later, our hero returns home and Safe welcomes him with a basket that her drinking buddy named Aranya, who we will meet later, gave her. The gift was a harpy egg, you know, the half-bird humans. Safe detects intruders in the clinic. They were the slavers and wanted to kill our protagonist, although the snake stops them. In the middle of the escape, they find Kunai, who takes them to a boat with Lulala and the dragon. They want help with these slavers and to save the kidnapped monsters, which are harpies. Obviously, they receive the help of the centaur because she wants to win Glenn's love. The group arrives at the lair, they take care of the slavers. The dragon is very powerful, until a problem arises when a harpy cannot hatch her egg, so the protagonist has to help her. Meanwhile, Safe fights with the enemies and we see that she has a dark side since her family trained her to be a warrior assassin. Almost finishing the fight, the snake faints because of a poison dagger, although later she wakes up with Glenn by her side. She thought he would hate her for showing her murderous side, although he reveals that he already knew that she has her instincts and that he will always love her until the end of the world. The snake, all excited, wanted to take a bite out of the protagonist, but the venom didn't let her continue. The next day, our beings, along with the centaurs, went to the city of the harpies. On the way, a landslide occurs, causing a centaur to be seriously injured. The harpies arrive and take her to the emergency room. Our protagonist checks her and only has a bruise on her hoof, so she just needs to rest. However, this greatly affects her companion, as she worries to the point that Tizalia can't work, so she asks our protagonist protagonist for help. Glenn, with the help of Safe, studies the centaurs and discovers a way for Rona to stop worrying about her friend, blindfold her and do sadomasochistic things with her with the permission of her doctorate. The two centaurs want to thank our protagonist with little things, if you know what I mean, but then they say it was a joke, although they promise that if he marries Tizalia they will do all sorts of things to him. After all this trouble with the centaurs, Glenn goes to dress one of the saved harpies, the one he helped give birth to. She is Illy. At first she acts rudely because she doesn't like the protagonist, but her problem is that her feathers are slowly falling out, but Glenn tells her that she is just changing and that she will be flying again soon. Later we see that this girl has social problems, so she decides to run away from the village. Our protagonist looks for her and on the way discovers that this harpy has phoenix blood. In other words, she is a legendary bird. Finally, she grows her new wings and finds her place in life and apparently falls in love with our protagonist. Well, actually, he has all the harpies in love with him. Days later, the city has a spiderweb problem since Aranya, Safe's friend, has set several traps to catch Illy, since she wants to design clothes in the style of the phoenix. Later, she finds Glenn and manipulates him into joining her in her quest to collect material, until for a second the spider goes too far with him and wants to do what you're thinking. That's even though she's Safe's friend, but Aranya isn't in love with our protagonist yet. They are interrupted by Tizalia, who causes a catastrophe. Then Safe arrives safely for the fight and accidentally suffocates Glenn. At night, the drunken snake tells the doctor that she loves him and he finishes her off with an "I love you, Safe." However, at that exact moment an earthquake occurs. The village leader says that a giant is approaching and will destroy the public prosecutor's office. Tizalia orders all monsters to evacuate the place. Illy asks Dragon for help. Aranya carries the bags for the villagers and Glenn and Safe safely transfer the wounded, although they later discover that the centaur was going to fight the giant. But our protagonist stops her and comes face to face with the giant. Turns out it was all a misunderstanding. The giant had a fever and went to see a doctor to examine her. Our protagonist was happy to do her checkups and give her a prescription. And here is where the Harpy Town arc ends. Our protagonist returns to the town where a mermaid ceremony was to take place. But just as the dragon lady was about to give her speech, she faints. Later, the protagonist visits his octopus teacher, who tells him that Scotty has a disease that can be treated, but she doesn't want to be cured. Because of this, Kunai cries and asks our protagonist for help to examine the dragon's disease. To do this, he had to go alone into the darkness of the night and see her face for the first time. The dragon, with pure respect, showed him her disease, a tumor the size of her heart that was slowly taking over her body. Glenn begins to touch her to see her veins, continuing with her scales, tail and wings, to the point where the dragon continues to make strange noises. The main objective is to perform surgery to remove the tumor, but it wouldn't be that easy because they would need a lot of material, information, help, and to convince her that she has to undergo the operation. To do this, he gathers a group of doctors made up of the octopus teacher, the lucky protagonist, the jealous snake, and the desirous spider. Before starting the operation, some things happen that I will tell you because they are important to the story. First, he had to convince Scotty to undergo the surgery, so he started going to the palace every day to convince her. On the other hand, our protagonist needs surgical materials, so he goes to Cyclops to get them. Among them was Meme. Meme is a pessimistic Cyclops who always thinks negatively, although she is willing to do everything possible to save Scotty, since she sees her as an idol. Their task was to make some tools strong enough to cut dragon scales. First, this girl had a hard time since the needles were too weak, until she found a way to mass-produce many of them. The next day, they found her unconscious and took her to Glenn's clinic. Turns out that she was sick because Cyclops tend to get dizzy from anything that spins. After recovering, she shows them her method of making needles, which consisted of spinning a wheel, which made her dizzy. In the end, they get all the material and Meme falls in love with our protagonist. Glenn then tried to convince the dragon to perform the surgery for an entire night. During that time, Aranya, Safe, and Tizalia had a girls' night out, which continued with a conflict and ended with a revelation that was very clear that it would happen. During the time that has passed, Aranya has not separated from Glenn. She wants to tie him down. She can't stop thinking about him and she goes crazy every time she talks to him. Safe and Tizalia also say that they feel the same, that they are in love with our protagonist, concluding finally that this girl is also in love. Let's go back to Glenn with Scotty. She is getting worse every day and can't stand up well. Our protagonist helps her see his greatest creation, the city. She thinks that her destiny is to die with her goal accomplished, but Glenn tells her that a girl like her should live live much longer. Scotty promises that if the surgery goes well, she will do things like a normal girl and asks what girls do. Glenn tells her sweets, buying things, and falling in love. With that, the dragon is convinced and agrees to have the surgery. Now we go straight to the operation, which starts off well until the dragon's body starts to glow. So Glenn, together with his octopus teacher who sacrificed many of her tentacles, destroy the tumor and cure the dragon, who returns to normal life. Thanks to this, Scotty falls in love with our protagonist and wants to do everything with him. She also thinks about calling him Oni-chan. After the surgery, Safe becomes ill and Glenn takes care of her. And finally, the anime ends with the greatest promise of all: new adventures of Dr. Glenn and his friends.